I'm Brenda Tremblay, and with my colleague, WXXI's Beth Adams, I am happy to welcome you to Connections. Today's connection was made 250 years ago this year, on the 16th of December in 1775. That's when a minister and his wife welcomed a new baby to their parish in Hampshire, England. They named her Jane and described her in a letter as a plaything for her sister Cassie, as well as a future companion. That baby girl, Jane Austen, grew up to be all that and much more, including the author of 6 novels, thousands of letters, and iconic fictional characters who are still household names. You could argue that Jane Austen was the greatest influencer of the 19th century, though she herself would likely blush at such a modern appellation. On Connections today, we're going to mark the 250th birthday of Jane Austen, a literary icon who continues to entertain and delight and inspire generations. I'm so thrilled to be co-hosting with my fellow Janeite, Beth Adams of WXXI.
We're usually looking at each other through a long hallway and many windows, so it's nice to sit next to you for this hour. I'm really excited about celebrating Jane Austen. I want to start by welcoming our wonderful guests we have in studio today. Lindsay Warren Baker, the co-writer of Austen's Pride, a new musical of Pride and Prejudice, which I understand has been performed on stages from Seattle to St. Louis and a concert at Carnegie Hall. Lindsay, you along with Amanda Jacobs co-authored the book, the music, the lyrics. Give us a quick description of this production.
Sure. So this is an adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, but it is through the lens of Jane Austen herself as the writer, revisiting her first version of the story, which was called First Impressions. And as she goes through the process, encouraged by her sister Cassandra to do so, she encounters her characters and starts making tweaks and changes and starts to come to make some decisions about her own life and her own feeling and reconciling her past, and ultimately creates the novel that we know and love today. So that's the short version with song. They're singing.
I'm sold. I'm sold. But you're not playing in Rochester yet.
We actually have had some previous incarnations in Rochester, but we are not here right now. We're currently winding up a run at Stages St. Louis. They play through this Sunday. And then in a couple of weeks, they will begin a short multi-city tour in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Wonderful. Also in the studio with us today is Dawn Kellogg. We're calling you a Jane Austen superfan.
Yes, thank you very much. I've been a Jane Austen fan since I was like 11 years old. I've been reading her stuff forever. And it's just, it's part of one of those pieces of literature that informed me really early on, and so I still love her and still want to know more, even though there's not a lot more to learn, but, we're just so much to absorb and love about her.
Fantastic. And we're going to get more into our Jane Austen origin stories in a second. Thank you both for being here. And joining us remotely is another Austen superfan, Cherie Messore. Cherie, good to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be amongst so many other Janeites.
And finally, we're so happy to have with us Mary Mintz. Mary is president of the Jane Austen Society of North America. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Nice to meet everyone.
Mary, for the uninitiated, what is the Jane Austen Society?
The Jane Austen Society of North America, which includes the United States and Canada and beyond, we have international members as well, is an organization founded in 1979 based on a British model to pursue our interest in Jane Austen. We recognize her genius and we study that genius. We have more than 5,000 members who are engaged in that pastime. Some are scholars and some are superfans and enthusiasts like the ones you have here today.
Well, we're looking forward to hearing more about that for sure and taking a deep dive into the books of Jane Austen. We'll also have a brief quiz later on in the show to see how much you know, how many Austen quotes you can identify. It's not an intelligence test. You can be a Jane Austen fan. And if you're not really a Jane Austen fan, or you're the kind of person that like walks through the door and someone else is watching the movie and you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. We're hoping by the end of this hour we might be able to convert you to at least dip a toe into this world. We'd love to hear from you, and you can connect to Connections and our show about Jane Austen in a number of ways. You can call 844-295-TALK. That's toll free, 844-295-TALK. The local number in the 585 area code is 585-263-9994, or you can email connections@wxxi.org. That's connections@wxxi.org. Or we're streaming on WXXI News YouTube channel. You can connect to us as well that way. So, wonderful.
Well, yes, and I'd love to hear from our guest how and when you became an Austenite. We're calling it your Jane Austen origin story. So, Mary Mintz, let me start with you.
Well, sometime between the ages of 10 and 12, I read Pride and Prejudice. My mother had made me discard all young adult fiction and read only what she called classics. So I read that one, but none of the rest. I didn't fully appreciate it at that age, but you can reread Jane Austen every year, and I've done that many times, and you grow to appreciate her. But a lot of the story just went by me. I missed some of the humor, lots of the biting social commentary, but I did enjoy the romantic story.
So you did not know at age 10 that you would be the future president of the Jane Austen Society of North America.
I had no idea. No idea whatsoever. And then when I was writing my master's thesis in Victorian literature, one way that I escaped my responsibility for writing a chapter a week was to finish off the Jane Austen novels I hadn't read. So I was goofing off in graduate school, finishing Jane Austen.
I think she would approve.
Yeah.
Dawn Kellogg, you mentioned a little bit during the intro that you were also quite young when you discovered Austen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say, I probably was more of a film thing because my parents had just gotten cable. I'm old. And they were, I think it was on Showtime or something, they were screening the original film version of Pride and Prejudice with Laurence Olivier, and I had the biggest crush on Laurence Olivier. And so it was Pride and Prejudice with Greer Garson. It was amazing, a really wonderful, fun, but not really close to the bucket.
With those giant hoop skirts?
With the giant hoops, I know, totally
Antebellum Pride and
non-period.
Prejudice.
Absolutely. But, and then I was like, oh, you know what, I'm going to read the book. And then I read that and Emma and more and more. And I just love I love going back to her. I love reading her, when I was young, but having the totally different perspective when you're older, when you're like looking for love, and then when you found love, and just those different stages of life. You can take her at every one of those stages and still be fulfilled.
Absolutely. Well, let me go to my other Austen super fan, Cherie Messore. When did you become a fan? I've known you for a long time, but I don't think I ever asked you this.
I think I was also probably 11 or 12, and my point of entry was a different book. A book called Up a Road Slowly by Irene Hunt. That was a young adult book, won the Newbery Award for Children's Literature in 1967. And in that book, Julie Trelling, who is the heroine, is sent to live with her old maid aunt in the country after the death of her mother. And the old maid aunt was the school teacher in the little one-room schoolhouse in the country, and was also a huge Jane Austen fan, and would talk frequently about, rereading and Pride and Prejudice. Young Julie is also, kind of catches on to this, although she feels that she's kind of a little bit of the outcast because she's the girl living in the country, spends about 10 years. She references her schoolmates who didn't appreciate Jane Austen, and she says that's indicates to me such immaturity. And her other family members kind of tease her about, being the next generation of person to, read Jane Austen in their family. And that to me said, I have to discover this Jane Austen person. And so, of course, I had to pick up Pride and Prejudice because that's what Julie was reading in the book. And that's a day at the races right there. That's when it all started. And I think from there, my next book was Sense and Sensibility. And again, I'm reading this as a 12, 13-year-old. I'm latching onto the history because I love to read historical fiction. So I'm connecting with Regency era history. I'm focusing on things like the fashion, and I'm not quite understanding a lot of the humor yet. I'm loving the idea that there's romance, but I'm not quite understanding the subtleties and the other intricacies that she weaves into her story so beautifully. But what hooked me was, the fashion and the ideas, but then also her beautiful use of language and how she used language so lovingly. And that always would send me to the dictionary because, in the olden days, we didn't have phones to look up words. And, we didn't know what a reticule was until we went to the dictionary. But I was always reading with the dictionary next to me, looking up all these references. So that was my point of entry, and it's been nonstop ever since.
Imagine that, kids. We actually did leaf through hard copy dictionaries to look up words. I can attest to that. Lindsay Warren Baker, how about you? You've crafted a large part of your career around Jane Austen. Where was the entry point for you?
It actually was later than the other guests. For me, it was the film adaptations that were coming out in the 90s. And I think maybe the first one I saw was Emma with Gwyneth Paltrow. And then there was Mansfield Park that came out that, of course, now I know people have opinions about. And then I think my mom got me a set of VHS tapes, and one of the Persuasion with Amanda Root and Ciarán Hinds was in that. Oh my gosh. So that was my way in. I've always been a big fan of costume drama. Yay. PBS Masterpiece, all that good stuff. So that was really my way in. And then when my friend and co-writer Amanda Jacobs, we just happened, kind of synchronicity, to realize that we both were interested in Jane Austen, and she had this idea to turn Pride and Prejudice into a musical. And so then from there it was like, okay, BBC miniseries and reading the novel, and the rest is history. And that was 25 years ago.
What were the challenges of making a Jane Austen novel into a musical?
There's so much there. And trying to decide a few things, trying to decide what are the important points that are necessary to telling the story, where to take our artistic license, because it's a totally different genre, right? Being on stage is different than film. It's different than a novel, obviously. But also how to remain within the spirit of the show so that it appeals both to Janeites, who are very devoted to her and her legacy, as well as folks who are Janeites and Austen fans because of film, and just appealing to the contemporary audience that's going to be seeing it, and theater audiences who may not give a fig about Jane Austen, but maybe they'll find their way into her because of going to see a stage show and a musical.
Well, we want to talk more about the film adaptations and some of the opinions that you allude to. But Beth, what was your origin story?
Well, I am going to leave you all in astonishment. I was 33 years old the first time I read Jane Austen. Don't ask me how I think I escaped it because in AP English in St. Mary's High School in Lancaster, New York, DennisOwers was our teacher, and he gave us things to read like The Red Badge of Courage and The Heart of Darkness. And so that's the track I was put on by him. And I had a friend, some of you might know him, the late film theater critic Bill Klein, who looked at me one day and he said, "You're a Jane Austen fan." I said, "I am?" He said, "Yeah. The BBC miniseries was about to come out, and before it did, I read Pride and Prejudice, and I was transfixed." That I think in 1 week I read all six novels right after that in rapid succession, and I haven't stopped since. I've been reading a lot of fan fiction too. Yeah, lately the prequels and the sequels and the Pride and Prejudice variations, which I admit that's my bias, is Pride and Prejudice, Lindsay, which I think maybe you would say too. Have any of you read the fan fiction?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
No.
Do I detect like you're not interested, or you just haven't gotten around to it?
Well, a little bit of both. A part of me is like, oh, do I really want to dip my toe in the water and see how their take on it, or do I just want to live the Jane Austen purity life? I don't know. Maybe I'll get there. Maybe it'll convert me.
Yeah. For me, it's like not wanting to leave the characters. I want to spend more time with the characters in these different plot twists and how they navigate those.
And even Jane Austen had an imagined life, afterlife for her characters. For the two main characters in Pride and Prejudice, Elizabeth Bennet and her sister Jane Bennet, she writes to her sister Cassandra that she's going to a certain art exhibition and she's going to look for their portraits. So for her, they lived on as well. Fan fiction is, as you say, a way in which her works live on for us.
Very interesting. You're hearing a conversation about Jane Austen. Big surprise. This is Connections on WXXI. I'm Brenda Tremblay.
And I'm Beth Adams.
And we are wanting to know your opinion as well. If you have thoughts about Jane Austen and you want to chime in or ask a question, you can call 844-295-TALK. 844-295-TALK. You can also email connections@wxxi.org, connections@wxxi.org, or you'll find us on YouTube, live streaming the WXXI News YouTube channel. And we will have a short quiz coming up in just a few minutes. We'll hear some clips from famous novels and see how much you guys know about Jane Austen.
In the meantime, I would love to hear your thoughts about why you think Jane Austen's work, her novels, still appeal and captivate large audiences around the world. More than 200 years later, her characters seem so relevant, so real. How does this happen? And we don't necessarily see this happening with a lot of other artists, or maybe I'm wrong. Dawn, you look like you're eager to answer that.
Because like Shakespeare, we look at Shakespearean characters and we can relate to some of them in a lot of ways. And I think when you read Jane Austen, it's the same thing. You can see a bit of yourself in Emma, when she's like, gossiping around. You can. For me, I love the relationships between siblings that she writes about so vividly, because Jane Austen loved her siblings, and especially her sister Cassandra. I have a sister, and those are very real relationships. I mean, they're the things that we can't identify with so much in this country, certainly primogeniture and stuff like that, but certainly those relationships and just the want of love in your life and good fortune and all that kind of stuff, with things we all desire. So that to me brings her to, she's transcendent. She transcends time for me. That's why she's so adaptable in other, like with Clueless and things like that, where they do use her work as a basis. So,
I was going to ask Mary.
Yeah, Mary Mintz. What is the modern appeal of Jane Austen?
Well, I think it's just as the previous guest said. I think it's human nature to want to make a connection, especially a lasting romantic connection, to find love in one's life. And all of her novels offer that as a possibility. There are obstacles in the way, but eventually two of the main characters find each other and learn to understand and to relate to each other. And I think it's just human nature for us to be able to identify with that marriage plot or that romantic plot. And when we go back to the novels to reread them, we become aware of other characteristics. The realism that you mentioned, the fact that she has a really wicked sense of humor, the fact that she deals with social social and economic issues, because beyond the love plot, all of the women in the novels, or many of the women in the novels, have to marry for economic security. And so that's a major, almost hidden issue that a first-time reader of Jane Austen may not catch on to. And she also has in her background the Napoleonic Wars and such major issues of the day as enslaved people. There are allusions in at least two of her novels to that predicament and that terrible aspect of history. So she's really rich and really complex in many ways that we don't particularly notice the first time we read her. And fortunately for modern readers, contemporary readers for us, this is an age in which scholarship on Jane Austen is really flourishing. You can find out more about that by going to the Jane Austen Society website, which is jasna.org.
Mary, for someone who hasn't read Jane Austen or has never, taken a trip into her world, where would you start? Which novel would you say is probably the best place to start?
Oh, I agree with everyone. It's Pride and Prejudice. Mm-hmm. That's the novel in which Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet fall in love, and it's led many people to fall in love with Jane Austen's novels. You can't go wrong with any of them, but I would definitely propose Pride and Prejudice first. Mansfield Park is probably the only one that I wouldn't begin with, though it remains the favorite novel of some Jane Austen readers. It has the most moral complexity and maybe a little more challenging to read for that reason.
There are also annotated versions of these novels where you can read the novel on the left side and then see notes on the right side, which are really helpful. It explains to you like what a barouche box is and, just like all these weird things that we have no idea what they're talking about.
And those are wonderful. I can't endorse a particular publisher, but there are several out there that are really helpful.
And I think some of them are not heavy academic tomes. They're more maybe user-friendly if you just want to have a quick glimpse at something or a description of something, right?
That's correct, yes. And it's okay with the Jane Austen Society. We're not stuffy at all. If someone happens to see one of the film adaptations or this musical, Pride and Prejudice, and then says, oh, I really like that movie, or I really like that musical, I want to read the book, that's a perfectly acceptable way to learn about Jane Austen. We welcome everyone who appreciates her.
Well, we're hearing from Aaron on YouTube, who says his Russian Jewish grandma changed her name from Ziprin to Bennett because she wanted a more anglicized name, and she was in love with Jane Austen.
That's amazing. Fabulous story.
And we also heard from Sue, who wanted to know if you are all familiar with the movie that was shown recently here in Rochester at the Little Theater, Jane Austen Wrecked My Life.
Yes.
I wasn't able to go, but I did hear about it.
Yes, same with me. I have not seen it yet, but it's on the list.
It's well worth it.
Is it good?
It's definitely worth it. I recommend. I don't think it's playing at the Little now. I
Okay.
don't know if it will come back. It's probably streaming somewhere, I would think. Yeah.
Yeah. Has Cherie, Mary, have you guys seen it?
I haven't.
It
seen
hasn't played
yet,
in
though.
Buffalo
I
yet, but I'm
intend
going to be on the lookout for it.
Okay.
And many Janeites have seen it. Sorry
Nice.
for the crosstalk.
It's okay.
We're all so excited.
I know, seriously. Let's take a short quiz after a short break here on Connections. And if you would like to chime in about Jane Austen, ask a question of our guests, the number again, 844-295-TALK. You'll find us on YouTube. Just look for WXXI News or send an email to connections@wxxi.org. This is Connections.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Bob Johnson Auto Group, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson. Believing an informed public makes for a stronger community. BobJohnsonAutoGroup.com.
This is Connections. I'm Brenda Tremblay, happy to be co-hosting with my friend and colleague and fellow Janeite, Beth Adams. And in the studio, you're hearing the voices of Jane Austen's superfan, Don Kellogg, and co-writer of Austen's Pride, a new musical of Pride and Prejudice, Lindsay Warren Baker. On the phone, you're hearing superfan Cherie Messore and Mary Mintz, president of the Jane Austen Society of North America. And we're going to take a little bit of a quiz now, okay? This is not
It'll be fun.
Yeah, it'll be fun, or else. So,
You'll hear
very, very brief quotes from Jane Austen's novels, and the challenge for you is to identify which novel and perhaps which character. And we can take our time here. We don't have to blaze through all of these. I will say, too, we searched high and low for someone with a British accent at WXXI, and we actually ended up turning to a friend of mine who lives in London. He's a British stand-up comic, a character actor, Adam Levine. He's wonderful. He lives in London right on Regent's Canal. He threw a blanket over his head to record these for me, and you may actually hear ducks quacking in the background.
That's on the River Thames, right?
So here we go. Cut number 1.
It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife.
All right.
Should we all say it?
Yeah, okay. 1, 2, 3.
Pride and Prejudice.
All right, let's go. Number 2.
I cannot make speeches. If I loved you less, I might be able to talk about it more. But you know what I am. You hear nothing but truth from me. I have blamed you and lectured you, and you have borne it as no other woman in England would have borne it.
And we left off a word there because it would have given it away. Any guesses?
Lindsay knows.
Yes, it's from. Oh, do you want to say it, Mary?
Oh, it doesn't matter. I'm happy for Lindsay to get first, or we could go together.
Why don't you say the title and I'll say the character?
Okay. The title is Emma.
And the character is Mr. Knightley.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Excellent. You guys are doing great at this. All right. This might be a little harder. Ready?
Life seems but a quick succession of busy nothings.
Cherie, do you know?
I do know that quote.
Is it Northinger?
Close. Anybody?
Mansfield Park.
Yes, Mansfield Park. That reminds me, one summer as a project, I decided to read all of the Jane Austen novels and then see all the film adaptations I could. This was before cable on demand. This is ancient history now. So I'd go to the library and I would get out. And what was fascinating to me with Mansfield Park was reading the novel and then getting the movies, including that Miramax movie, which was so sexy. I mean, some of the scenes were just like so over the top, and that was the first time I think in my adult life I realized the poetic. What's the word I'm looking for? Just the license. Yes. The possibilities of poetic license. Okay, so what we just heard was life seems but a quick succession of busy nothings from Mansfield Park. Here's another tricky one.
No man is offended by another man's admiration of the woman he loves. It is the woman only who can make it a torment.
All right.
It's a great line, isn't it?
I'm good. Northanger Abbey.
Yes.
Yes.
Well done.
All right, we have a couple more here. Here we go.
Is this the one that's going to make me swoon?
This might be the one with the ducks.
Okay.
In vain have I struggled. It will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you.
Shall we say it together?
Yes.
Mr.
Darcy. Pride and Prejudice. The ducks make the moment. I think that's the most romantic proposal ever.
Well, yeah, and think about Colin Firth coming out of that pond.
There you go.
I'm trying not to, but yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, we have 2 more here. No, 3 more. Okay, here we go. The next one.
You pierce my soul. I am half agony, half hope. I have loved none but you.
Oh. Let's give our phone guests a turn here.
Oh,
so,
do we have? Oh, yeah. Cherie Messore.
Cherie, do you know? Or Mary?
Yes, that's Wentworth in Persuasion.
Yes.
Yes.
One of the best love letters of all time.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, some scenes. I've written that some people think that letter that Wentworth writes to Anne in Persuasion is a little over the top. Like even Jane Austen was pushing the limits of what was realistic. You know what I mean?
I don't care.
Yeah.
Okay. It works for me.
All right, we have two more here.
My idea of good company is the company of clever, well-informed people who have a great deal of conversation. That is what I call good company. You are mistaken, said he gently. That is not good company. That is the best.
We've got Lindsay reciting the words here.
Yes, that is also Persuasion.
Yes.
And that's Mr. Elliot and Anne.
Mr. Elliot is a bad guy. Oh, spoiler alert. Okay, one more. We have one more quote here.
It is not time or opportunity that is to determine intimacy. It is disposition alone. 7 years would be insufficient to make some people acquainted with each other, and 7 days are more than enough for others.
Now, I know Dawn knows the answer, but I'd love to give Cherie a chance to get in here. Cherie?
I think she might be frozen.
Oh, okay. Our connection to Cherie is a little stuck.
No, sorry about that.
That's all right.
There you go.
She got it.
She got
Okay,
it.
sensibility.
Sensibility.
Yay. So you guys did all so well.
I think Marianne says that, right?
Yeah, she does.
Yeah. So thanks to my friend Aaron Levine, I've been trying to get him to come to the Rochester Fringe Fest to offer his stand-up comedy show. He goes to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival every year. So Aaron, if you happen to see this, just come to Rochester, do your thing.
You already have a local fan club.
No. You are hearing a conversation about Jane Austen. This year is the 250th anniversary of her birth. There are balls and parties and book clubs and celebrations all over the world. And on Connections today, our guests include Don Kellogg and Cherie Messore, Mary Mintz, president of the Jane Austen Society of North America, and Lindsay Warren Baker, co-writer of Austen's Pride, a musical of Pride and Prejudice. And we would love to hear from you. If you have a comment, 844-295-TALK, 844-295-TALK.
Lindsay, I have a question for you as a playwright and a
Sure.
student of Jane Austen. As you know, her work has inspired, I think, a lot of other work that I would think of as a modern twist on her Regency world, like Bridgerton, the Netflix smash series. There are purists among us who, I think, like Dawn was saying earlier, stick with the original tone and the work. And others like to kind of broaden their horizons. What do you think about the more modernized and sometimes sexualized interpretations of Regency storytelling?
Well, I think that as someone who found their way to Jane Austen through those interpretations, particularly the romantic Mansfield Park, before I knew what it actually was, I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with it if it takes you to her, And yes, of course, then you're going to have opinions about which adaptations you like and which adaptations you don't like. There are some modern contemporary adaptations of the novels that I really love. There's a very low-budget Pride and Prejudice that's contemporary and takes place at Brigham Young University. And it's amazing and it's silly, but it's a great film and you can find it somewhere streaming. But then I also have very strong opinions about the current Persuasion that came out on Netflix. I just rewatched it recently and was like, oh yeah, no, I have very strong opinions about that film. So, to each their own. But I think if it draws you into Jane Austen's genius, then what's the harm? It's showing a love of her. But and each person who's doing a derivative in some way, shape, or form has to decide for themselves what their intent and their purpose is and how much of her spirit they want to retain.
Yeah, well put. Mary Mintz, what say you?
Well, I totally agree with Lindsay about this. I don't care, as I said earlier, and the Jane Austen Society doesn't care how people discover Jane Austen as long as they find her, because finding her will enrich your life. And I think many of those sorts of adaptations do make an effort to have authenticity or they do takeoffs on authenticity. So they might exaggerate Regency dress for effect, for instance. But watching something like that means that you can still learn about Regency dress and perhaps about Regency history at the same time. So all of it makes for fitting background for an introduction to Jane Austen.
Cherie Messore, we had a little technical glitch and we lost you for a bit there on Teams. So you're back with us on the phone now. What do you think about the modern takes on Austen-type stories?
Well, I think it keeps the interest alive, and that if that becomes a point of entry for people to enjoy the novels and go back to the novels, I think that's a great point of entry. I would not want to think that is someone's only view of Jane Austen. There was that mashup that came out a couple of years ago, the graphic novel that was, Jane Austen meeting Abraham Lincoln. So things like that are a little bit, out there. It's a little bit out there, but if that becomes that point of entry, that inspiration for someone to discover what it's like to read a Regency era novel by someone who was living in that era and who's someone, written by someone who was truly a woman of her times. I think it was Mary who mentioned early on that almost all of her heroines were women who needed to marry out of economic necessity. And Jane herself was someone who chose not to marry. She had a brief engagement, and then she had another letter of proposal when she was in her late 20s, which would have, made her already a hardened spinster. And, she made her choice to live her life independently and focus on her writing, and the fact that, with only 6 published works and a few unpublished works, that became the focus of her 41 years. And the idea that she wanted to live her own life on her own terms in a time when other women weren't doing that, and she was writing about women who had to not do that, I think is really admirable. And if, again, these modern adaptations gets more readers to read the original work, then I think it's okay.
I'm wondering what you all think is her darkest novel. And Cherie, let's start with you. Which one of her novels do you find the most serious or the darkest?
I think Mary already referenced Mansfield Park because it just has, that kind of deeper kind of connection to it that isn't as enjoyable, perhaps, as Pride and Prejudice is, where there's a smile on every page. But it does have sort of a different depth to it that has a little bit of a darker side to it.
And what about you, Mary? What would be on your list?
I agree with Cherie. It's definitely Mansfield Park. One of the central characters, Sir Thomas Bertram, and his son actually go to the West Indies. And he's checking on his business interests there. So he's gone for an extended period of time because he has to make an overseas voyage. Contemporary readers of Mansfield Park would have understood that he was checking on plantations with enslaved labor. So that cast a kind of pall on that novel, I think, and rightly so. And then the main character, Fanny, tries to talk with him about slavery when he returns, and she reports that everyone was silent when she tried to have that conversation. And there's enormous wealth behind Mansfield Park, the imaginary fictional Mansfield Park. So it's probably ill-gotten wealth for that reason. So there is also a heightened awareness of the issues around enslaved people through the very title. Lord Mansfield was a high-level judge in Britain who presided over a famous case that I'm going to oversimplify and say the question, he dealt with more than one case, but the question mainly before him for which he was most famous was that of if say someone from the American colonies was accompanied by an enslaved person when he visited Britain, would that person have been free in the UK where slavery was banned or not? So just the title and the location for that novel also brings forward the issues around enslaved persons.
I've never thought about it in that context, so I want to go back and reread it and look for those. What about you, Dawn?
Well, for me, Northanger Abbey has its dark points too, because obviously you have the first part, which is light and lovely in Bath, and then you have when Catherine gets to Northanger Abbey, and she's thinking in her brain that the owner of the estate has bumped off his wife, and so it's sort of Gothic novel. Yeah. It's her little foray into Gothic fiction, but it all ends well anyway. So
I think she was having fun, maybe teasing the Gothic fans
exactly
a little bit with that one. Yeah.
And what about you, Lindsay?
So this isn't necessarily dark, but I find the most mature story of all of them is Persuasion. And that's one that I have an affinity for because it's revisiting a young love, and the characters are therefore, coming at their second chance with 8.5 years of distance and time passing between them. And there's so much that's unsaid in that one, where they're not actually talking to each other. And when they do talk to each other, it's just everything that is accessible, socially acceptable and implied until they can finally reveal their true feelings. And I think that might be one of the reasons why that letter is the way it is, because he's finally able to say everything that he's feeling, where they haven't really been able to talk to each other. And they're very human. They're very human in their emotions and feelings about each other and why they feel the way they do about each other. So I have a really strong affinity for that novel and that story.
For me, that's a large part of Austen's genius, is her ability not only to understand the human condition, but understand relationships the way she did. And then, started to write Pride and Prejudice, I believe, when she was 19 years old, in the first foray into that, which, of course, 19 then isn't 19 now. But I often find myself wondering, where did that gift come from? She's writing in this rural small town in North Hampshire with a father who's a rector and is very willing to let her read a lot of the books in his library. She had no real formal education. It just astounds me, her brilliance, her genius.
Yeah, Mary might be able to talk about this more, too, as the scholar that she is, but she did have insight because one of her brothers was adopted by a wealthy family member. So and because her father was a pastor, they had access to all the different classes, right? Yeah. So she was able to experience the world in a way that we might not think she would have, but because of those certain circumstances, I think she did get to know more.
And her mother was also of a higher class than her father actually was too. So that
socially,
marriage, socially, yes.
Well, PBS recently,
and because she was she was also such a reader.
Yeah.
And my mom always said that the best writers were the ones who were the most ardent readers. The fact that she was allowed to read and maybe just read beyond her own depth of understanding to some degree. That's how she became self-educated and maybe had that different eye of the world, because she was being not only allowed but encouraged to read the books that were accessible to her at the time.
Yeah, and she was hugely influenced by Fanny Burney, who came before her, and she was a writer of the Georgian period, who also sort of lived in Bath. She was born in 1752 and died around 1840. But she wrote vividly about the life in the Georgian period and obviously Austen's Regency. But that's where Austen gets Pride and Prejudice. The title Pride and Prejudice from is one of Burney's novels called Cecilia. And it's very cool.
You've read it?
Yeah. Yeah, and I remember when I was living in London, which I did for 13 years. one of the theater companies mounted a production of A Busy Day, which is one of Fanny Burney's plays. And it didn't last long. It was more what I would consider museum theater, but it was on the West End for a little bit, starring Stephanie Beacham, and it was really interesting. The thing about Burney is she writes very lengthy and dramatic, and it doesn't have the realism that Jane Austen has, but Jane Austen loved Fanny Burney, so that's a great resource too, to go back and read some of Fanny Burney's works.
Well, we have another connections question here, and maybe this is for Mary. Why is this such a girl thing? Are there any men who read Jane Austen and join these groups?
Yes,
Thank
there
you.
are.
Excellent question. Mary, can you give us the bird's eye view there?
Well, it is an excellent question, and I don't have a good answer. I'll have to say that somehow contemporary taste has changed, because throughout the 19th century, there were many male readers for Jane Austen. She wasn't exclusively a woman's writer. And then in the early 20th century, there are lots of reports about how soldiers from what is now the UK, who were fighting in the trenches in World War I, escaped from that horrible, miserable existence they were living in the trenches by reading Jane Austen. And more than one British prime minister, all of them male up to Margaret Thatcher, has been reported as reading Jane Austen, sometimes while they were waiting for election results. So I can't exactly account for why she's become more of a bonnet reader than a derby hat reader. And I think if more men were introduced to her, they would also see the light, so to speak. And we do have men in the society, and they're quite dedicated and quite interested in her in all kinds of ways.
I will say, if and this isn't to toot my own horn, but I will say what's been really fascinating about the audiences in St. Louis when we were there for the previews and opening was how many men liked the show, liked the story. And I think that so there's something to a testament of she is accessible, and it depends on what it is you're interested in looking at. But they can see themselves in it too. They can see a Mr. Bennet with 5 daughters, right? They can see, there's the military aspect of the redcoats and the soldiers, and they know a Mr. Wickham, right? They know the upper class Darcys and Bingleys, right? These people do exist. So sometimes they have to be kind of dragged as a date maybe to some of these things, but once they're there, they do find their way in and can find interesting things about it. I was rewatching one of I forget which one, the other day, and my husband walked by and said, "Wow, she really had opinions about the upper class, didn't she?" Yes, she sure did.
Well, there was that book and movie that came out in the early 2000s called the Jane Austen Book Club. Mm-hmm. And it was about a book club that, that was their preference. And of all the members, I think there were 6 members, and only one was male. And in the book, and I haven't read that in a while, I was seeing the movie as well, each character was sort of associated with one of the novels, and the only male was the one connected to Northanger Abbey, and that was the one with the more of a connection to the Royal Military, kind of based on some of her brother's experiences. So, if that takes the story theme, that idea of connecting with a man in the military, and maybe that's, men are more connected to military history, perhaps. Again, if that's their point of entry, it's okay.
Okay, we are going to wrap up our conversation in just a moment, but I just want to do a really quick survey here, and that is your favorite movie adaptation of a Jane Austen novel, or maybe 2. Lindsay?
Oh, gosh, of course you start with me. Well, I will say that I like so many of them. I know. But the Amanda Root Hines Persuasion is really, really good.
Okay. Dawn?
I love Emma Thompson's take on Sense and Sensibility. I just think that is one of the most accessible versions of that. I really love that. And I also, it's not a movie, it's a miniseries, but I do think that Pride and Prejudice 1995 is the most definitive version of that. It takes its time. It's wonderfully done. And my friend was the producer on it. So,
Interesting.
so and he used to keep his BAFTA in the kitchen. It was hilarious. But anyway, but yeah, those are my two favorites.
Okay, Mary?
I totally agree with Lindsay.
Yay! Good.
She's named the best ones, and I'll just add one more. It's the version of Emma starring Kate Beckinsale.
Oh, yes.
I'm quite fond of that.
Okay.
Cherie?
I agree with Emma Thompson and Sense and Sensibility, and also the BBC miniseries of Pride and Prejudice, largely because the relationship and the interaction between Colin Firth and the woman who plays Elizabeth.
Jennifer
Ely.
Mm-hmm.
The two of them together, their interaction, I thought was just so pristine to the novel, if that's the right way for it, especially her... when I hear Jennifer Ailey's voice, that's who I kind of project into the words, the originally written words.
Same here. We're all nodding. Yeah. Well, before we wrap up the hour, I would like our guests to tell us how they might celebrate Jane Austen's 250th birthday on December 16th. Quick answers, if you could, Lindsay?
Hopefully with Austen's Pride on Broadway.
Food. She talks about food in her novels. I'm going to create some of those recipes.
Cherie?
It's also Beethoven's 255th birthday on the same day, so hopefully rereading Pride and Prejudice and listening to some Beethoven.
Woo-hoo. And Mary, finally, 10 seconds, please.
Oh, I'd like to be in Lindsay's audience for the Jane Austen Society.
Thanks to our wonderful guests, Mary Mintz, Lindsay Warren Baker, Dawn Kellogg, Cherie Messore, and my co-host Brenda Tremblay. Thank you for being here, and thanks to everyone for tuning in. Another hour of Connections is next.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.